Hello and welcome to episode number 14 of the COOs Corner podcast, the podcast exploring success factors in the world of business operations. And my name is Tamar Nelson, your host and a specialist in the area of operational resilience. And today we are exploring the topic, Journey to the COO role, advancing your career's velocity. COOs play such a very important role in organizations, and I believe they oversee the heart of the organization, its operations. So if you're a COO or planning to be a COO, recruiting for a COO, or a COO looking to transition, or you just want to get some tips on how to plan your career path, this episode is for you. We are going to look at why it is important to determine what kind of COO you are prior to positioning yourself, and also look a little bit on some key COO capabilities. To do so with us today is none other than Gina Riley. Gina is the career velocity lady. This is talent recruitment on steroids. Her role is that she's a career coach, and she shifts clients' mindset from just a quick resume fix to helping them to develop a sustainable professional career plan. And one thing she's great at is helping leaders to unpack and to articulate their career story and key results so they can land with decision makers in interviews. So she's really an authority in this space, and she has created her own program called Career Velocity System, and she holds a master's degree in whole systems design and is a certified UMAP coach, and is an executive search consultant and conducts interview skills and talent selection training. Wow. Welcome to the podcast, Gina.
Way too much.
You are more than a handful right there. And definitely the person that we need to talk to.
I've been told that I'm more than a handful.
I will ask you who said that. And I hope it's not hubby. But Gina and I have been collaborating and carefully crafting this episode for a few months now. And this will be one of a two-part series covering 5 articles, which are to be published in Mary Henderson's Authority 5.0 magazine. And our discussion today will discuss the first 2 articles that will be published, and the second will leave for later this year to be recorded and aired. And I'll tell you more about what the next episode will contain at the end of this podcast. But on today, we are going to be diving in a little bit into the COO role. And, this is the podcast where we speak about all things operations and growth on a business and on an individual level. And so we're going to tackle both today, on the individual and the business level, because if you're an individual and you benefit, and you're a right fit for an organization, the organization will benefit. So, Gina, a little bit about what you do. You're an executive search consultant. Is that the same as a recruiter, or is it a little different, or is it a subset of? Could you just tell us a little bit more about what you do before we dive into the discussion?
Absolutely. There is a lot of confusion about the different kinds of recruiters. So, it can range from being an in-house recruiter, someone that's front lines doing sourcing, initial screening. And remember, every recruiter internally is a decision maker in the interview process. So, getting through those different gates, if you will, are all important. So as you're appealing to a frontline recruiter, it's through keyword searches and key phrases that they've been trained to be assessing and looking for, right? And then beyond the first line recruiter, you may have specialists within a company, especially big companies that might specialize in recruitment for software design or manufacturing people. Any lane of expertise you can think of, there might be a specialist internally who is working with the decision makers internally to bring in the right talent to assess them and get them hired for the job. There's also outside agencies, if you will. You have anything from staffing agencies who are kind of quickly trying to align people with roles and get things filled. That might not be, it may be for a long-term play in-house, or it could be for quick hits as there's a ramp at a company. There's also contingent recruitment, which is when multiple search firms may be involved with going out to the market to find a particular person for a role, but it also means that there could be competition among those search firms or even internal recruiters trying to fill that role, meaning whoever finds that candidate that says yes and starts is the one that actually gets paid to do that job.
Wow.
Where I sit in the ecosystem is doing executive search. We do retained search, meaning a company comes to us and says we want to contract with you to exclusively go to the market for us. All candidates will funnel in through the search firm for the assessment process and then partner with that company, whether that's the board of directors, the senior leadership team, to take the top candidates through that interview process and helping them assess those skills, rate those skills, and guiding them toward making the best decision for their team. And then that executive search firm gets paid for that exclusive contract. So if candidates come in from in-house or anywhere else in the ecosystem, it has to go through that search firm because of the contract.
Wow. So that's a pretty heavy role, and you're right in the middle of everything, and you have to interact with everyone within and outside the organization. All of the touch points you have your hands in.
That's right. If you're doing a really senior level search, an executive search consultant may be consulting with a board of directors if it's for a CEO role, for example, or it could be the CEO who's trying to hire a senior leader for their team or a specialist within the team. And so you have a lot of stakeholders and decision makers that care about that process on the inside. And then you're also managing the candidate pipeline, going to market, sourcing nationally, maybe globally for the best candidates, assessing the talent, and then keeping the talent warm or energized about the job while you try to get through the process. So there's a lot of moving parts.
And you have to do it fast so you don't lose that, so they don't get cold on you.
Yeah, that's the push-pull. It's fast with quality, right?
Wow. So you are definitely the person to unpack this with us today. We're happy to have you. So, Gina, where do we start as a COO trying to chart our path into the future? Take us through that process.
I think that what I find fascinating about the COO role is there's just no two COOs alike. I think if there was a COO convention and you have 200 people in the room, I bet there would not be an exact match of exactly the functional areas of expertise that person leads or even has content expertise in, right?
True.
Or the role that they play in conjunction with their leader, the CEO. So starting there and acknowledging that it's going to look different based on the two people at the top, the CEO and the COO,
right,
and the life cycle of the company. Is it an early stage company? Is it middle stage and high growth? Is it what I call wheels on the bus? It's already a very large company, and maybe it's just keeping everything between the lines.
Yeah.
You have to look at each of those people, what the life cycle is of the company, and what that company needs today out of that COO.
Absolutely.
So those are some of the things that I think about.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that quite a bit in just that one goal in terms of that relationship with the number one person, is that relationship is one of the most important ones, the COO/CEO relationship. That has to be key. And there's a number of things that you won't see on a resume that have to connect between those two persons for that to work. And and I think it's also important to recognize that, as I said, no two are alike. So for example, I interviewed someone a few episodes ago, and she is a CFO/COO. So she's both actually in her organization, which is very rare. I only, but it's unique to that organization and to her as well. So is it important then as an individual for you to know where you want to be and the kind of COO that you want to be in the future, and to chart that path for yourself and find the fit that works best for you? Would you think that's a great approach?
I think that's an exceptional approach. And what you're making me think of too is back to no two COOs are alike. You may have a COO who has most of the areas of functional expertise that all fall under them, or they may have a lot of the operations leadership, but they sit at the table as a peer with the CPO or chief people officer, the CFO, the legal, person. So it can look different, and there will be unique qualifications for the leader that serves in either of those roles as a peer to those people, or what I would call a leader of leaders. Yeah. Does the COO expect their COO to manage and lead those functional areas of expertise? Now, a COO usually comes up through the ranks through at least one or more of the functional areas of expertise. It might be through the marketing or the sales or the operations. I personally haven't seen as many come up through being through the HR, the chief people officer lane. I'm not saying it's not possible. I'm just saying I haven't seen that as much. So let's assume that most operations leaders are coming from one of these other functional areas. We need to know that that person can still lead functional areas where they do not have deep expertise, but they can lead and guide it, and they know how to select the right talent to lead that. That's key. Yeah. That's a very, very important point, Gina. Thank you for raising that. And I think we're going to dive in a little bit more as we go into the capabilities and the different types as we discuss. But great observation with the COOs that have come up through the ranks and have different functionalities, and the importance of still being able to lead right across the board, right? Absolutely. Leaders of leaders. I love that. So diving in, you wrote an article recently, from work done by HBR on the different types of COOs. Could you take us through some of those archetypes, Gina? Absolutely. So the Harvard Business Review in 2006 wrote an exceptional article. And for anyone in your audience who is a COO or wants to be a COO, I would recommend going and downloading that article. They talk about 7 archetypes. And when I look through those archetypes, I think that there could be a hybrid of any number of those, but I like to talk about them in there as a standalone, because what it helps a potential COO candidate do is first figure out how they're going to talk about themselves. Mm-hmm. What kind of COO role are you best situated for? And what kind of relationship, so you're living your best life on the job, what kind of relationship will you have with your CEO? How will you explain how you can best serve that person? So if we walk through these archetypes, the first one is called the executor. So this is someone who is, while the COO may have a heads out approach, working externally, this COO heads down or heads inward, focusing on the entire operations of the business. And so in this relationship, there's got to be extreme high trust, right? And great communication. I would say that for every single one of these relationships, but in this one in particular, if that COO is really managing and leading the whole operation, then they need to be, the second most accountable as well. So then we look at the second one, which is called the other half.
So before you move on, Gina, in the first one, that communication then is going to be key utmost in that role as an executor, because you need to, if you are the only one looking in, then you have to tell the person that's looking out what's happening and keep the loop. So if communication isn't your strong point, then possibly look at something else, right?
100%, because I think that the most damaging leader, no matter where they sit, is the one that isn't able to communicate clearly and quickly where the needs and the pain points of the business are.
Yeah, thank you. That's a tweetable moment right there.
Awesome, I love to be tweeted. Okay. Okay, so then you have the other half. So really this is like it's a COO that has a complementary skill set to the CEO, and they may actually share the burden of the role almost more equally, although the CEO has the buck stops here role. It might be a little bit more of a 50-50. And the person who is in that other half role may be also gaining some skills in order to be up leveled to a CEO someday, or to launch and be a CEO elsewhere. What do you think?
I think you're very right. Because sometimes, depending on how the organization has started, they want the company to have a particular look and feel. And so it's important to them to have this other half there that mimics the COO's experience, style, knowledge, and skills, because they want a certain trend to continue in the organization, and that trajectory and that person to understudy them, so to speak. So I see this a lot in smaller, sometimes large companies as well, but I see it in particular in like small business owners really might have want a certain legacy to continue. They have this. And they might have that role for many, many years, sometimes even decades, just to make sure they have the right skill sets to transition and run the company the way they want it to run. And that way, that legacy continues for decades, even hundreds of years. I've seen that happen in some companies as well.
The beautiful thing about this role for the CEO is they can be very intentional about the kind of COO that they hire or promote to alleviate their own pain points of functional expertise that they are not strong in. So let's say you have an operationally focused CEO who isn't super keen on the sales and marketing functions. They should go to market for or promote a qualified candidate who can make up for their own skill gap as well, and to empower that person to be that leader. Absolutely.
The more I dive into this topic of a COO, I feel that every organization needs one because when you look at the whole gamut of what it can do for a company, especially if you want to get to the point where your organization is growing or scaling, this is a key resource to have on your team that can actually help you to steer the organization the way you want to go.
Absolutely. And I also think it's okay to acknowledge that when a certain pair, a CEO and COO, have gotten to the point where a company has evolved where it needs to go, and then new leadership, something new needs to happen, that's okay too. So I'm putting that out there as well. Maybe it's time for that. If the CEO is staying in place, maybe it's time for that COO to fly and go and do their next best thing, that's a possibility. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
just an idea.
Yes.
So, and one of the other archetypes is the change agent. And when I think of a change agent, I'm thinking of an organization that now is going to lead potentially a dramatic change in the organization, whether that's some strategic initiative, whether that's some kind of something that's external with customers or in the industry ecosystem, or whether that's internally, maybe it's a cultural, initiative. I don't know what that is, but this is the person that is exceptional at change management and bringing people along through change and can manage people's emotions, has high EQ, and is just a very strong leader, can take people with the inception of what the change is going to be, draw that nirvana state so everyone gets excited about it, and then puts in the building blocks into place and the KPIs and the measurable, metrics that show people that there's progress being made.
Right. And I almost want to think that, this is something that every COO needs to have a little bit of, this change part of it, because especially now where things are changing every day.
Yes.
There's nothing called normal or steady state these days. And so you have to be managing change within your organizations on a daily basis.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And, organizations, right now will have to go through are going through massive transformations. And this requires careful change management techniques applied to ensure that you can still deliver to your customers on time, in the right quality, and even exceed their expectations. Right. So
retain your talent and retain the talent that you work so hard to get, unless they're the wrong talent, unless you have a misalignment of skill sets after you have the change. That's the idea, is get everyone through it whole and into a new state of working.
Yes. I love that. Getting through it whole, and then you can, change when you have gone through that rough patch. Excellent. And
absolutely.
Yes, and so the other one is the mentor. You want to talk about that?
I like to think of the mentor as the seasoned executive who isn't not necessarily married to being the CEO at this point in their career. Mm-hmm. It's just maybe not the priority, but they bring in this skill set that helps to elevate the CEO's performance. It's almost like maybe an executive coach on steroids. I don't know. But this is the person that helps a CEO develop their skills, maybe help reflect skill gaps and ensure that they shore that up going forward. And the mentor may actually be someone who's helping someone who is, let's say it's a family business or family company, and you've got that the person that has just taken on that role, but they haven't been a CEO before. This is like a business. This COO is like a business coach for that person, because that person isn't going to lead. That person's taking the role for a reason. The family business or whatever. So that's the leader that can set their ego aside and go and really elevate their success. Depends on whether or not they can elevate that CEO's performance.
That's an interesting role to have. And I can see that really boosting the morale, the engagement, the confidence of those that, they would impact, because everybody would be touched by such an individual. Yes.
I also like to think this person would be known to be effective if they work themselves out of a job. It's kind of like being a parent. Like if you have children and then they fly the coop and they go and, they lead a successful, healthy, happy life.
Yes.
Look at it that way. Like you can go in and like shore up that CEO's skill set, and then it's time for you to move on. You did your job.
Absolutely. And I think there are some fractional COOs that would play this role, that
Yes.
that literally go into an organization and help the CEO to work through some of the bottlenecks or the pain points and work themselves out of that role, and know that the CEO can manage and has taken the reins and carries the company to the next level. And that would mean success for that fractional COO. So I've seen a number of fractional COOs in this particular role. So that's a good one.
That is a perfect correlation. Yes.
Yes. And now we move on to the partner.
Mm-hmm. So this is a little bit similar to the one we talked about earlier. So the partner is kind of it's a two in the box. They play off of each other's strengths. And it's when maybe a CEO really works better with that collaborative partner. So it feels more like an equal relationship, although we know, like, a COO, like I said, the buck stops there, but it's just a little bit more of a, it's closer to a peer relationship.
Right. Nice. And the heir apparent.
Yes, the heir apparent is, it's a little bit similar to the next one that we'll talk about, but this is a way to give somebody a test drive to see if they could be ready to align with becoming the CEO. So it's someone that, a company may tap on the shoulder. They don't want to lose them. So they're specifically grooming them to take on that role, which may take a couple of years. And the smartest companies in the world are going to do that bench strength planning, so they don't lose their top talent to another company and have that great talent go run another company. Yeah. So why not take advantage of who you have internally and have the CEO be the mentor, maybe hire an executive or business coach to shore them up so that they can take on that role and potentially be promoted, especially if you don't want to lose risking them. You may have invested years in that person, so you want to keep them.
Wow. And that goes right into now the MVP.
Yes, I find it to be a little bit similar. This is a valuable key player. You may identify them for succession planning purposes. I kind of see those two interchangeably, yeah. So when I read the article, I don't know, it's a little bit of a shoulder shrug to me. I kind of see those quite similar.
Yeah. So there's some bit of overlap there, and what we would have to do as individuals, or if we are COOs, or if we are aspiring to be a COO, is to look through these. I would suggest that you all read the article, and the link will be in the show notes. Mm-hmm. All the resources in this episode will be in the show notes, so you can read the article and determine what kind of COO you are, or you aspire to be. Or mm-hmm. If you are an organization looking for a COO, then you look and see which one would you want to have on your team. Right.
Absolutely. And what's so critical about this, and this is one thing that escapes candidates sometimes, it's on you to go through that list and start to figure out how you'll talk about yourself. So you don't flash out, hey, I'm a COO, pick me. This is the kind of COO I'm best in alignment to be.
Right. So, Gina, you wouldn't advise somebody going to an interview and saying, I am an MVP COO.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't do that. If I was an internal candidate for a COO role, I'd say I am dedicated to this company. I'm excited to stay here and grow my career. My goals are to become COO so that I can gain and broaden my skill set, so that I can further advance the company. And I think setting off those signals is important to let a company know that they're kind of on notice in a positive way, that you're putting a stake in the ground. I want to grow my career here. I want the mentorship, and I want this responsibility. And what do I need to get there? And I have coached people. I actually have 2 clients right now. They're not COOs. They're in other functional areas. But the reason why they hired me was not to leave their company and go get another job. they're positioning themselves internally, and they're trying to get that story together so that they can talk to those decision makers and tell them what they want.
Wow. To say, I am ready. Here I am.
And they're both getting it. But if they weren't getting it, they're both in the middle of their transitions. But if they weren't getting what they had set out to do, they were preparing themselves to leave.
Gotcha.
Pretty cool. So it's kind of a double thing. They can't lose, right? So if you to getting the coaching, like they either make that move internally and the company says, yes, we want to pull you along. We see the vision of where you're going, or we don't support that, you know.
And
but
that's
this company
fine.
put their resources and their energy around supporting those people to make it happen. So very exciting.
So having this kind of conversation, it's a win. It's a win for everyone, if you know, and a win for you as an individual. Any way you take it, to have this, you know, to assessment done, where you look and see what is it that you want to do, where you're positioning yourself, and to be able to be in a position to tell your story. Just as how you have articulated it. So I hope you were taking notes of that. That was very well said, Gina. I'm like, wow, that was brilliant. You know, I would say, I'll hire you, Gina. I'll hire you. And, you know, coming out of what you just said, you know, how you said it, it came to me that one of the things that I've seen, even in this podcast and interviewing COOs, and you know, in my experience working along with COOs, is that they all have a kind of passion about them, that they want to see the company succeed. They want to see the company grow. And I'll use this now to transition into the other article, that the second article, which deals now with, you know, some of these capabilities as COOs need to have to be successful, and what persons are looking out for in a COO role. So can you introduce the next article on this one?
Absolutely. Yes. So you and I both love this article too, by EY. And I forget the year right now, but they have an extensive article. 2016? 13. Extensive article and research-backed article that has the core capabilities of the most successful COOs, the X factors, like that extra it factor that these COOs bring. And they have incredible case studies for people to like bring some of those capabilities to life. And so today, like in our conversation, maybe we can just touch on these 7 capabilities that bubble to the top. And really in the next time, our next conversation, what we're going to do is dissect how you take those capabilities and transform your narrative for interviews. That's the goal, right?
Wow.
Right. So we probably won't have enough time to go into the definition of each of these things. We'll kind of hit the highlights. Sure. And then the whole idea is that for your audience, right, that when they're listening to this, they're thinking, what do I need to communicate first? Which archetype fits, you know, what I have to offer? And then what of these 7 core capabilities, what stories am I going to be telling to bring my expertise to life? So what I'll do is I'll start with the first one, because this is huge. You and I already talked about this. Mastery of change management.
Yes.
This COO candidate is going to need to be able to explain specifically. We go back to that SOAR methodology of storytelling. What's the situation? What were the obstacles you were overcoming? What are the actions you took? And what results did you get? So if you're a master of change management, you need to start writing down situations where you had to lead an organization through a change initiative. What was the change in a nutshell? Why did the change need to happen? And then what your leadership role was. And again, how did you lead people through the change, right? Because we don't do it all ourselves. So if you're showing up with I, and not a little bit of I led this and we accomplished that, you're not going to come across as a humble leader. So I'm just throwing that in there as something additional. Can I move to the next one?
Please go ahead. Excellent points so far.
So, The second one is engagement in strategic board level decisions. You absolutely need to be ready to explain to your decision makers when and how you have been in front of a board. Did you prepare the presentations? Did you deliver the presentations? Did you bring in a team of people so that other people on your team got exposure? We need to know that you've actually been in the room influencing decisions, not just coming in for, a dog and pony show and then leaving. The third one is setting and enforcing robust operational controls. If you don't understand risk, compliance, regulatory constraints, and that's not a part of your toolkit, that will be likely a red flag for your decision makers, because as an operations leader, I would say that this capability is going to be like a minimum bar. Don't you think,
Yep.
Tamar?
Fundamental. On which everything
kind of a fundamental one. The change management is like, that's the great leader, but that third one is kind of low-hanging fruit. The next one is designing and implementing the organization's operation model. You need to be prepared with stories about how you assessed an organization's structure for performance and then organized it for optimum success. And oftentimes we have to reorganize too after we've organized, right? So what were the iterations? And again, back to change management. How did you bring people and teams through, to the other side, to a new way of operating? That's a big deal. Yeah. Right. The next one is proficiency in identifying and extracting efficiencies. The COO, the terrific operations leader, is going to understand how to be responding constantly to the things that are happening from external and internal forces, if you will, right? So you have to hold your container of the operation and keep everything running as you fold in new ways and new practices to respond to these dynamic situations, not least withstanding something like the pandemic hitting, right? So how do you respond and keep things efficient and moving and revenues up and people employed and so on. Two more, deep industry and market knowledge. Like we talked about before, an operations leader can come up through any functional area of expertise. So layering on top of that, if you're going to be selling yourself as a COO candidate, you need to bring broad industry expertise on top of that functional expertise that you've got as well, so that you can explain, to your decision makers, boards of directors, investors, whoever, what you see on the landscape so you can respond appropriately internally. So the stories around that. And then the seventh core capability for most successful COOs, according to this EY article, is finding a multicultural management approach. Today, we are working in a global society. I don't think we need to say that more than once, right?
Not at all.
If you're going to be a COO of a company that has any global touch whatsoever, you need to be able to understand and respond to that. I've seen plenty of COOs come up through the ranks after having some kind of international, experience. So I think that's really key today in those top 7 capabilities. What do you think?
I think that if anyone is listening to this podcast driving, they would have to stop, pull over and take out a notepad to take those notes, or they'll have to listen again to get those gems, Gina, because you're totally on point with everything there. And,
you can just listen on replay. It's all good. And it's in these articles too. So the articles that I'm doing for Mary's Authority magazine, I'm adding some homework assignment prompts. Nice. that dovetail with what we're talking about. So I'm sort of just synthesizing what these amazing companies, HBR and EY have done intense research on. This isn't my research. This is my encapsulation of the research. And then the way that I want to help job seekers is to go and just think about, write down what are your stories that will connect with the person that's going to hire you based on these capabilities.
So guys, you don't want to miss part 2 of this. So you need to subscribe to Authority Magazine so that you can keep track, and then we'll come back here. And if you have questions that you want me to ask Gina, you can email them to me, or you can reach out to her, and we ensure that they're answered in the upcoming podcast. So this is golden. And you know what the good thing about this, Gina, is that this approach can be applied to any C-suite role. You know, it's not just a COO role. So, you know, any C-suite role, if you're aspiring or transitioning or you're thinking of, it's basically the same principles. You find out what kinds are there, what you want, and look and see what your stories are and how you have demonstrated that you have these capabilities, and the story is to support that and to then articulate it, which we will get to in the next episode of really getting into the interview and what we say when we are there. This is really golden. So you
thank you. I can't wait to dive into that, because that's really, that's where I think you and I can really help people.
Right. And in terms of other resources, Gina, where can persons really get some more help in terms of their career journey? What resource would you point them to?
Oh my goodness. Well, I think it depends on the topics that they most are interested in, like what's really causing them concern right now, whether that's challenges networking with people or challenges preparing for, interviews, specifically behavioral interviews, because they always seem to be like a sticky source for people. Right. So on my website, Gina Riley Consulting, I have a tab for articles and resources. And it covers a lot of these topics. One of my favorite topics, though, is a series that I've been writing called How Your Next Executive Role Finds You. Mm-hmm. And so in there, a lot people who go and read those articles can see within those narratives how professionals that may seem like them landed in that next best role, primarily through the power of their relationships. Right?
I've seen a few of those, and they're
working up internally or externally, and they're all different. All those stories are different. There's different people, different industries, and different C-suite roles, and what their career journey was. And I love them all. They're like my babies. So they're really, really good. So that's where I would point people, is go check out that series. And just start there to get energized about how to align, for the next job.
And I've read a few of them, and they are phenomenal. So can they find that on your website, Gina?
Yes, all of those are on my website on the articles and resources tab. And then the second thing I guess I would say is further down on that page is a link to a podcast that I did, and it's called How to Answer Any Behavioral Interview Question. Yeah. And it's been downloaded like 18,000 times. So people are liking that one. So I have had people reach out and say that was really helpful. So that might be something to check out if people are in interviews right now.
So there we have it. Ladies and gentlemen. So, that was a whole host of information there. A lot of resources will be in the show notes for you. Gina, is there any question that I should have asked that I didn't ask you?
Oh, that's one of my favorite questions. Not today, because you and I are gearing up for part 2, which might be, a couple months down the road after I develop these other pieces.
Awesome.
Ultimately, we're going to have a guide for COOs. They'll be able to print the whole article down the line, yes. And print that and have like the archetypes and have the capabilities all in a one-stop shop, so that they can just print it and start building stories.
Yes, I think that will be so valuable. And I'm so happy that we're able to work on that, so that persons will be able to have that resource. So it's going to be great. And so please stay tuned. Gina is one brilliant mind, as you can see. And, I want to tap into your brain a little bit. As an executive coach, what question that you frequently use when you're working to get the best outcomes, like working with teams or with organizations? What's one of your go-to questions?
Oh gosh, maybe this is a bad thing to say, but I don't have like a specific question that just pops to my mind. And here's why. As doing executive search, what my focus is on the job profile. What are the core capabilities and outcomes that I need to see from that leader to get the outcome at that job? And so what I'm doing is I'm going through and I'm picking out some of these capabilities that you're seeing, like change management. So if I know that I'm going after someone who's going to clearly have to come in and be a manager of change, I'm going to ask questions around that. So it's not one. I have so many.
What's one of your favorites then?
I love to hear stories about how people led teams and how they recruited talent, how they managed to get people strategically on their seats on the bus to drive an organization forward. I like to hear that higher level story about identifying talent, attracting talent, and then how they develop their talent.
Oh, that's an executive question. And that's why you are an executive search coach. And the best in that field too. Boy, it's always such a pleasure talking to you, Gina. And, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your skills and your wisdom with us today. To your listeners, I hope you, and I know you got massive value from the discussion today. And, please share in the comments what you like most about this episode. To continue the conversation with Gina, you can reach out to her for a free career transition webinar and workbook at GinaRileyConsulting.com to make your plan today. So it's a lot of resources on our website. You can get lost there and spend days there. And that such a rich resource there, as no lie. The second episode, as we mentioned, will focus on the X factors for COOs and how to prepare stories for interviews, among other things. And you can read our articles on the Authority magazine, and the links will also be in the resource section in the show notes. So, we really hope that you will be planning your career and with velocity, and we want to hear all about it. So you can always reach me on LinkedIn at Tamara-Nelson or at Tamara@tamaranelson.com. And if you'd like to be a guest, or if you have a suggestion for a guest, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you. And please free to share the links with others who may find this podcast useful, and leave a review and a rating on Apple Podcasts. So please join us again for another information-packed episode. Until next time, as they say in Jamaica, walk good.